Hey guys, we are going to start doing some intensives as far as the middle part of our history standards go. We are going to actually pick up as Georgia begins to grow as a state. And we're going to look at, today we're going to look at the growth of Georgia and then lead into the actual removal of the Native Americans. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at significant factors that affected Georgia's development from 1789, which was the last constitution that Georgia wrote and approved after we became a state, and lead right up to antebellum. Okay, so let's look at some different factors that took place that helped us to grow as a state. Okay, first off, we've got the University of Georgia. All right, if you'll remember, we talked about the fact that universities were mainly for those who were wealthy. They were privately owned, and so Georgia saw the need for a public university. It's called a land-grant university, and that's because the General Assembly granted the land for the university. Now, while this was a public university, it was still only open for white men. Okay, that wasn't something that changed. It just gave more white males the opportunity to actually go to school. Okay, it actually was established in 1785, so it is the first public land university, but its doors didn't open till I think early 1800s. Now, why is this significant and how did it help with Georgia's growth? If you'll think about it, you have this public university that most states don't have. None of the states actually had them until much later. And so now you have this public university that just about any white male can go to. And so many people are going to want to come into the state. And it actually just helps our state to grow. Okay. All right. So let's look at Louisville. Okay. If you'll think about it, guys, our first capital was in Savannah. Then it moved to Augusta. Okay. Basically, the moving of our capital to Louisville shows that our people are starting to, or our population is starting to expand and starting to grow. You want to keep your capital basically in the middle of all of your people, so it's easily accessible and that sort of thing. Now, while it was a great capital for about 10 years, they ended up having to move it even further west, not only because we began to expand more, but also there was an outbreak of malaria. Malaria is not good for your population. Okay, don't want your people being sick. So, did it have a role in helping Georgia to grow? Sure. It did help bring our economy up, but the biggest thing is it helped to show that our population was beginning to expand, so our capital needed to move with that population. Okay. All right, the Baptist and the Methodist churches. Most of you know you can't walk down the street today without at least running into 2 or 3 different churches. Okay. Back in the late 1700s, early 1800s, the Baptist and the Methodist churches began to grow immensely. And basically they led that to everybody was having this great awakening. Okay. The Baptist and the Methodist churches started to spread throughout Georgia, and as they spread, these churches began to become larger. You have the Methodist church and the Baptist church using things like tent revivals and camp meetings, and basically what this did is it showed that again, our population's beginning to spread. Okay, so the Baptist and Methodist churches were very influential in this because people wanted to spread Christianity around, and so they did that through these camp meetings and tent revivals and things like that. So our population began to spread throughout the state as well. Okay, then you have the cotton gin. Obviously, guys, slavery is still a pretty big thing in the South. Okay, before cotton, if you'll remember, our biggest crop was tobacco. Okay, cotton was actually something that a lot of people needed, but it was actually very tiresome and very hard to get the seeds out of the cotton. So slavery, as far as cotton went, was actually on the decline until 1793 when Eli Whitney created the cotton gin. And basically what this did is it sped up the process of getting the seeds out of the cotton, which meant that you could pick more, you could go through and sort through more, get the seeds out, and it took, your normal slave from collecting anywhere from 5 to 10 pounds of cotton a day to now they could get anywhere up towards 50 pounds, which meant that lots of people wanted to get in on the action. They wanted to plant their own cotton. They wanted to plant more acreage of cotton because they could get more from it now. Okay, did this impact our economy? Yes, it helped to bring cotton to the forefront. The South, especially Georgia, was getting a lot of money brought in because of cotton. Of course, it affected slavery as well because now we have the ability to go through more cotton, so we needed more slaves. So, of course, that increased our population, but also people wanted to get in on the cotton action, so they moved in to take part of it. Okay. Then you have the railroads. The 1830s were big. This is when you start seeing the first railroads being constructed in Georgia. Before that, things were only done by horse and carriage. If you lived close enough to the coast, obviously you could use the shipping industry. But the railroads opened up a whole new world for Georgia. It opened up a lot of frontier that we weren't able to truly get to. It also brought a lot of businesses into Georgia because now their services and their products could reach farther distances. Okay. One of the biggest things to hit Georgia was the city of Terminus. Terminus was a huge railroad terminal. It was one of the largest ones in the South. Many people ended up setting up shop in this area. Terminus later became known as Atlanta. Atlanta is a huge city to us today because it's not only our capital city, but it's a huge financial area for our state, but also for the Southeast and the nation as well. Okay, so how did railroads impact Georgia? Well, not only was it able to bring more people into our state, but it was also able to help our businesses to grow because now our services and our products could go to other areas, which helped us to grow. Okay, and then of course you had two different types of ways to give away land. Okay, the first was the head right system. The head right system, if you think about it, the heads of families had a right to certain amounts of land. Basically, when the first colonists came to Georgia, they had to be given land. And if you'll remember, they were given up to 200 acres of land, and then you usually would get 50 more acres for each family member, which was great. Okay, but if you'll remember, when we first began as a colony, we were told what we had to grow and that sort of thing. As we began to want our independence, obviously we were given the ability to grow and do other things with our land. But as we started to expand west, we were here on the coast, and as we started to expand west, we started to take away land from the Native Americans. If you'll remember, that would be from the Creek and the Cherokee. And as we did that, we had to figure out, well, how are we going to give away this land now? And so we started using a land lottery. And if you were a white man or a white male, 21 years or older, you could pay for a chance to win a certain amount of land. You could win, a few acres to several hundred acres. And this is how a lot of the land in this area was actually given away back in the early 1800s. Okay, so as we started to give away land, you got to remember it wasn't really our land to begin with because we started to remove the natives from it so we could take it over. Okay, again, thanks to the cotton gin and the railroads, different technologies, we were able to expand not only our population but also our businesses, and our state just began to grow. Okay. 1795 actually brought on a huge ordeal. There was a lot of land to the west of us where modern-day Mississippi and Alabama are today, and we weren't quite sure if it belonged to the United States, if it belonged to Georgia, because in our original boundaries, we were supposed to go all the way out to the Mississippi River. But again, we weren't quite sure who it belonged to. Several of our General Assembly members at the time ended up being bribed by some land companies to sell all of this land for very, very cheap. I mean, you're looking at a cent per acre. You're looking at about 35 million acres. Okay, so basically, these land companies were able to get this land for next to nothing, and then they were able to sell it, and they were making a lot of money off of it. Okay, but this ended up coming out into public view, and so people were like, wait a minute, where's all this land coming from? And they found out that the General Assembly members were bribed, and they sold this land basically without anybody knowing it. So what happened? Well, the U.S. government had to take that land back because it didn't belong to Georgia necessarily. So what they had to do is they actually had to buy out these people that had bought this land, because at that point, once the land companies sold the land to individuals, it was a legal contract. No matter how the land companies got the land, it was still a legal contract. So the U.S. government had to come in and buy out the individuals that had bought this land for $5 million. So what happened? Well, Georgia was not looking too hot. We weren't sitting in the right seat, basically. We were sitting in the hot seat. And so we lost all of that land to the west of us. And so now this is where our modern day boundary of the Chattahoochee River comes into play. So were we still able to expand? Sure. We just didn't get the ability to expand as far as we thought we were going to, because some of our General Assembly members decided to do some bad things. Okay. All right. So as far as that goes, now we have begun to grow. Now we've got to look at, well, how does the Native Americans come into play? Well, the Creek were the first to begin to be removed. Okay. Basically, you have several leaders of the Creek tribe that wanted to do what was right. And so he wanted to protect his people. And so he went to New York City, which at the time was our nation's capital. And he said, look, I will sign the Treaty of New York, and I will give the U.S. government and Georgia this land. And basically it's going to be the land east of the Oconee River. He said, look, I'll give you all this land, and then that way we'll take over the rest of it, and we'll all live happily ever after. Well, just because he signed that one treaty, was that going to be the end of it? No. So what did McGillivray do? He gave it away. Okay, he gave the land away honorably. So remember, McGillivray gave it away. But then you have the man, William McIntosh. McIntosh didn't do that so honorably. McIntosh got a little greedy. He was in charge of the last remaining portion of Creek land. And he actually decided to take the money for the land. He went in, he signed the Treaty of Indian Springs, which gave up the last portion of Creek land. He gave it up for money, which he was not intending on giving back to the tribe or anything. And once his tribe found out what he had done, and he had done so dishonorably, that he was killed by his own tribe. That was part of their law, was that he was to be murdered. So McIntosh, he got the kibosh, meaning he got killed. Okay, what happened to the rest of the Creek land? It's gone. It's no more. So the Creeks are gone. Okay, they've moved them west into Alabama. So now you have to look at the Cherokee. Okay, Andrew Jackson gets elected. He's not a nice guy when it comes to the natives. He's very greedy for land. And so he was very supportive of removing the natives. Okay, and he's going to come back into play later. All right, the gold rush, 1829.